Awesome. So I just want to say thanks to everyone that's here. And thanks for sharing your Saturday with me. We're going to do a quick little walkthrough on a VulnHub box called DriftingBlues 1. It looks like a series. So I'll probably do maybe the entire series. But this is the first box in that series. I was doing some live hacking maybe last week or even before that on these. I typically have a few boxes kind of running at any given time. And then ones that I feel are easy-ish, I usually will share with the group since I'd say majority of our members are probably getting into security, maybe getting into these CTF style things, boot to roots. They're definitely a way to keep your hacking skills as sharp as possible. There's lots of these places out there. This is from VulnHub. And basically, it's just a repository for you to download OVAs and then hack at your leisure. Other popular ones are like Hack This Site and Hack the Box. Also great resources as well. Those are typically ones that you may be VPN into those and don't necessarily bring those environments into your environment or system. So pros and cons of each. But do you hack for your career just to find back? Yeah, both. So there's a question about, is there a forum for this? I'm not quite sure what you mean, but as I go through, just feel free to, again, ask type questions. I'll circle back around to them, but I just want to get through the walkthrough, and then I'm more than happy to circle back around, answer questions. And then if anyone is hacking along and you're stuck, we'll definitely get you through that. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump in. So can everyone see my screen? I'll make sure I can see my screen. So you should see two terminals. Awesome. We got a yes. So for the setup, right, I have my virtual box manager, and then I have the VM, running. So technically, actually, no, that's off. Sorry. It's going to start running now. So this is one of the questions we get a lot is, hey, I got this VM running and I don't know what to do with it. How do I log in and all that good stuff? So the idea is that we just start the machine so it runs, and that's literally where we leave it. We don't interact with it anymore. So I don't care that maybe there's a login. We are going to ignore this from here on out. The idea is that there is a box somewhere on our network that we have to hack into. So obviously for that to work, we need to have, hopefully proper networking settings. We need to pull an IP address, and we need to be able to locate that, which we'll do. So this is sort of my setup. It's running. I'm not worried about the terminal that's in. I don't really need that anymore. It's up and running. And one of the first things we want to do is figure out what is what is the IP of that box. Some boxes, when you fire them up, they might actually tell you. It might give you a little prompt of like the version and all that stuff. Maybe it gives you the IP. That's great, but I would still recommend getting into the habit of how to locate the IP yourself, or how to find that. So NetDiscover is a popular one. You could also just use nmap and do the SN. And we'll basically do a range. And the SN flag essentially is just like a ARP sweep. It's just basically saying, hey, I'm going to throw out a bunch of pings who replied back. And for that, again, we should know. Actually, let me take a step back. We should first know what our own IP address is, right? So we need to know how to separate ourselves from the rest of the bunch. So I know that this is my local IP address, like that I would get out of my home network. And then this is my host only IP address that is internal to VirtualBox. And this is the environment that I will be working out of. So this is the kind of IP address that I'm expecting to hopefully find when I run a sweep. So I'm going to run a sweep of this sort of octet, this range right here. So now that I know what my own IP address is, hopefully anything else that's not one is going to be possibly our target, or maybe there's multiple. Again, depending on what your setup is, you might have multiple VMs running. You're going to have to try and figure out how to sort out what's what. But nonetheless, this is the IP range that I'm going to do an nmap sweep on. And then once I get something back, I should be able to determine what my target is. So again, we'll just do the SN, and then we'll do our 192.1 and chew gum and talk at the same time. And then we're going to do our .1/24, which is just our the range, and then see what we get back. I did this before. It should keep the same IP, and which it did. So I know that this is me, and I know that this is not me. So this must be our target. And I know that I only have one other box running in host only, so that just for that specific reason, it just makes finding things on your home network very easy. The downside to bridge works usually very well. The downside though is if you have a large home network, you might have a hard time figuring out, well, what is this vulnerable box versus the other 100 computers on my network, like versus my other workstations, my laptops, my IoT, my like all that stuff. So that's kind of the downside. Moving forward, once you figure it out, you could probably tell your router, like, hey, if it's in bridge mode, make this thing always keep this IP. Yeah, so there's a networking question. Why don't I run 1.103 or whatever? That's again, so, and that would conflict with other things on my actual network, because this is the IP address of my Kali box. And then this is the IP address of my Kali box. This is the IP address of my Kali box within my home network on this .1. Everything in my home is on this sort of subnet. And this is everything in my virtual box environment. Everything is on this subnet. So there's a little bit of separation, both I think for security that works, but also at the same time, it just, some environments just work better out of the box. It's like some boxes just pick up internet easier when it's on, you know, NAT versus bridge versus whatever. So it's something you kind of just have to play around with. So now that we know what our target is, we know our target address, we can actually start with doing a few different things, and I'm going to reach out to the CTF toolkit to make life a little easier for us. A quick sort of shameless plug. I did recently do an update. I added some content. You guys can figure that out for yourself. But I did add a few things that helped my journey with this box. I wanted to sort of share that. So the first thing we're going to actually do is enter our target into here. And this will make life easier when we start copying and pasting stuff. So if I can go over to web apps and see now that wherever I have an input that would be a sample target, that will be in there. So for now, we're going to go to networks. We're going to look at nmap and maybe try something like this to try and actually enumerate now what ports are open on the box. So now we found the box. That's step one, is just locating the target on your network. The next step is, okay, well, now we need to start enumerating that target. We need to start figuring out what port, where are attack vectors, where are our possible entry ports or entry points. Those are things we need to start, figuring out. And so now that we have our target address, that's where we're going to start attacking. We know that that's our box there. So now what we're going to do is I can just, I already copied that to my clipboard. I can paste that, and essentially it's going to run this command here, this nmap flag, this -a, maybe I'll get rid of. Most important thing is this -p- that tells nmap to scan all the ports, all 65,000, whatever, 535 or whatever that is, just to make sure we cover our bases, because if there's anything over 1,000, which I think may not be included with this flag, we might miss. And so if there are high ports open that we need to exploit, we would never see them without this flag. So it's extremely important to make sure you're remembering to run that -p-. We'll see if it likes this. So that's good. So far we see 2 ports open. We should get back a little bit more information with these flags, giving us some information about services and things like that. That'll help. But right now it just looks like you're kind of run-of-the-mill ports you'll see open. 22 for SSH, and then 80, which is usually going to be a foothold. Most of these boxes have something to do with a web, with something to being exposed, and that's a lot of times our entry point, where we'll find some maybe weaknesses or find some hints. This is a capture the flag, which means that there are 2 flags on this box. There's a user flag, which is usually a little easier to get, and then there's a root flag. So at some point we know that we'll have to elevate our privileges to go from basic user to a root user. So it's very common to see at least these two ports open. So at this point, we need to start making sure we're taking notes. Extremely important to make sure you take notes throughout everything that you're doing. So you can see here, I ran nmap, and these are the two open. So I essentially highlighted those, and then I'll start maybe building out like a template and cherry tree. You can see here that I have something for port 22, which we're not even going to end up messing. Well, we'll use it, but we're not going to be necessarily hacking it. And then you can see port 80, some things that that we'll start discovering here very soon. So as soon as we kind of see what's open, that's when we're going to start kind of going down the rabbit holes for each one. And again, because some of these things will become very familiar very quickly when you start doing a lot of these boxes, and you'll start forming habits, hopefully more good than bad, but bad habits happen. I'm no exception. A lot of times the minute I see port 80 open, I will just immediately open up a browser and try and go to the IP address of my target in a web browser and see if it loads something. 9 times out of 10, it usually will, if port 80 or 8080 or something running HTTP. This is a pretty good indication that there's a web server running. So let's hop over to there, open up a new tab, and see what happens. So sure enough, this our target is hosting a website, and this is 9 times out of 10 going to be our way in, or at least give us a foothold to a way in. And some of these boxes are a little bit more realistic than others. Some of them we need to actually exploit vulnerabilities in the application to get in. Some of these are maybe will just give us hints and will be more of like a treasure hunt than necessarily an actual exploit. But they both exist. Yeah, I think you can. Someone asked if you can give it your credit card. Unfortunately, that looks like a dummy store, so you'll have to give your card to other scammers. But whenever we're presented with a site, there's two things that I always recommend doing right off the bat. One, scrolling through it, just clicking around, seeing what it is. How do you interact? Is there a login? I'm going to skip over a lot of things that maybe I did or that you could do. I'm going to kind of cut to the chase in this walkthrough. So you're not really going to see all the things that I tried that failed. That's where the live hacking comes in, which, hopefully maybe catch me on the Discord doing these boxes live and just laughing at me, watching me stumble. You guys are going to get the cool, the condensed version that looks like I really know what I'm doing. So when I scroll down, the first thing I noticed was I did notice some usernames here. So I kind of logged those. I didn't see anywhere in the site to log in, but I noticed that there was some contacts, some names, and you have to remember that these are vulnerable boxes and everything is fair game, which makes it kind of fun and infuriating at the same time. You never know what is a clue and what is just stuff. Anyway, so again, what I started doing was, okay, I have that. Maybe I'll jot this down somewhere. CTF Toolkit does also have a place for some notes. You can type in stuff here. It's using local storage, so you and only you are seeing that, and it does stay there. If you close the app or navigate around and come back, that stuff will stay. But nonetheless, I use Cherry Tree for most of my stuff. So this is where I'm logging pretty much everything that I'm doing. So the first thing I do is whatever I can see on the surface is like, okay, on the surface, this is the site. Okay, now the next thing I always tend to do that I highly recommend getting in the habit of, especially when you're presented with a web application, is we need to view the source. And not that source, so that I inspect the element. I'm doing selection source, sorry. I swear I know what I'm doing. Let me move this thing out of the way. Oh, hold on. Okay, Control U. So this is the source of the application. And, for those maybe that know a little bit about web development, a lot of the stuff is just your typical boilerplate bootstrap or some sort of styling and themes and just generic HTML. The thing I always look for is anything in kind of green, these comments, right? These are comments that aren't actually rendered to the page. They're just comments that the developer typically will make to make life easier during the development process. So I definitely want to look out for things like that. And sure enough, as you scroll down, you'll find this. And this definitely looks very suspicious. This is not your HTML or CSS or JavaScript. This looks like commented out base 64 encoding, which it is. So this caught my eye. I'm pretty sure I'm onto something here, so I can just copy this and walk on over to my toolkit here, go over to base 64 and plop that in there and then decode and see what I get. So it looks like I get an endpoint. I get what looks like a path, right? Note for kingfish dot text. So this is sort of interesting. So maybe I will copy that. Maybe I'll head over to here and add that after my path and go there and see what happens. Okay. So right off the bat, we're off to the races. Clearly, this is not something that would normally be in a website. For those maybe that see this for the first time, you're probably just like, okay, what gibberish am I looking at? This is actually like a form of obfuscation. You can kind of think of it, I like to think of it as Morse code, whether that is the right or wrong way to think of it, but that's kind of what I think of it as. You'll notice it's the same pattern of this okay, but you'll notice there's different punctuation. We got periods, we have some exclamations, we got some question marks. Maybe there is or isn't a pattern, but nonetheless, I kind of look at this as a very interesting way of doing Morse code. So I go back to my notes. I looked at the source. I saw that this decodes to that. I'm presented with this. And then what I can do is I can use this to decipher what it is. You just do a Google search and basically you'll come up with this application. I actually have this site on the toolkit for looking at certain ciphers. But nonetheless, you just paste that into here. Again, just do a Google search for like OK code or whatever, and paste it, click execute, and we'll get this back. So this looks like an actual message that decodes to. Right. So again, this box appears to be now like kind of very cryptic, probably along these lines of how we're going to solve this. Maybe there'll be some exploits, but right now it looks like a kind of just a your run of the mill. Hey, here's a bunch of hints. Here's a puzzle for you to sort of solve to try and figure things out. So again, back to my notes, I use that decodes to this, but there is some information in here. One, we know again Eric, so that appears to be a real name, and we also, if we remember him from our brief stint at looking at who's on what and names that are mentioned. So it does look like Eric may be like a legitimate user. He's trying to maybe tell us something. He also mentions that how to use a host file to reach our secret location. So for those of you who don't know, host files are essentially, think of it as like giving the application a name instead of an IP address. So this whole time right now, we've been interacting with the application under an IP address. That's how we've been accessing that. And with an IP address, we may be a little limited on some of the things that we can find. So you can see here, I ran nikto against the IP address, and I really didn't find anything. For those that do or don't know, nikto is just, think of it as like I'm paraphrasing, but think of it as like a vuln scanner for a web application. It's going to look at it from the outside and see if there's any known vulnerabilities from the things that it can find. It may also look for certain paths and things like that, certain files, but just think of it as an enumeration from the outside against a web application. So I ran that against this using this IP address, didn't really find anything, nothing that really caught my eye. I also ran derb, which is a directory, you can call it directory buster, whatever you want to call it, which essentially will try and use a dictionary attack against the application to try and guess paths. So you can see that it found this directory, it found this directory, just common directory paths and names are in a list. And then this application tries to go through that list and see what's valid and what's not valid. So I really didn't get anything here either. I didn't see anything jump out at me, nothing sort of suspicious or something that maybe doesn't belong. When things don't belong, it's usually fairly obvious that the person, these are kind of breadcrumbs that the author of the vulnerable box is trying to leave for you. A question with the tools for note taking, again, I used Cherry Tree. That's what this is. It's free. If you're using any latest version of Kali, it comes pre-installed, and it uses this sort of tree structure to do your notes, parent and children, and all these sub branches or whatever you want to call them. So I use that. I just recommend anything. Obviously, I mean, every Google Docs, Notepad, whatever it is, the cheesy generic notes that you can do over here. I usually use these for quick on the fly things. I'll place them here, but I definitely recommend something that's more permanent, for those. So with that said, so yeah, again, there's a hint that's essentially saying, hey, you should be using a host file, is what this is essentially saying. So what that tells me is that I should tell my Kali instance to use a host name instead of an IP address for the box. And maybe I might have better luck at doing some enumeration, because right now my enumeration has just been nikto, which didn't really give me any results, and then derb, which really didn't give me any results. But again, I'm looking at it from an IP address, not from a host name address. So one thing that you can do is just for now, I'll just cat mine Etsy hosts, but you can also nano it, which is what you, or whatever editor of choice is. And what this will do is essentially, you can see here that I've added an entry. Ignore this one for now. We'll get to this one, but I've added an entry for this IP address to point to this name. So kind of think of it like DNS or routing. Basically, hey, this IP address resolves to this. So now maybe if I'm going to do more enumeration, I might be able to get more information back, enumerating it from a host name perspective as opposed to an IP address perspective. Very common to do. Another telltale thing is that sometimes if you go to the website and it looks broken, or it looks like things aren't loading correctly, or maybe there's a login screen, but you can't get to it, meaning that there's a login screen because there's a login button, but when you connect to it, it looks messed up or doesn't reach. It's because this is actually saying login. The path might be like hostname / login. And that doesn't work if we're trying to use IP address / login. So another thing too, and again, the habit of sometimes you may have to add your target IP address to your local host file so that you can actually just view the page to begin with, but also it makes interacting with it and doing enumeration a lot easier. And so that's what we're gonna do here. So I've added it to my my hosts, and so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and I'll run this live. But now I'm going to go and do an enumeration with gobuster with vhosts in mind to see if I can find one, just if there's other maybe endpoints that make sense, or if there's other secrets, which you'll see that there aren't. And then two, the vhost, which is maybe there's some subdomains that this site, because again, we're still in the enumeration phase. I have no idea what the extent of the website is, how large is the website, what pages there are there sub pages or subdomains to this website? I don't know any of that stuff. I'm literally just poking around. Thankfully, this only had 2 ports. There's less rabbit holes to go down, but even with just 2, you can spend days, on a box just going down each sort of open port and kind of exhausting everything there. So what we'll do first is we'll hop over to, again, to make life easier and copy and pasting. We're in our enumeration phase. For those that maybe have never seen the CTF toolkit before, I kind of laid this out in the phases or the life cycle of hacking. So we have all of our enumeration stuff, and we have all of our actual exploit stuff, and then we have all of our actual persistence. And then just it circles back around. So right now we're still in our enumeration. We are on web apps. And so let me go down to gobuster, which is one of the newer sort of resources that I added. And again, it already has our target address. So now what we'll do is we want to update our target address to your drifting blues box. I think that's what it is. So once the host name is added, one way to check is that it should resolve in the host name. Oops. So if I type in this, it should still load the page. If it doesn't load the page, then I haven't added my host name correctly. So now if these links did work, in these links, you can see at the bottom left, if those were actually pointing to driftingblues.box/something, they would actually load. If I'm still trying to reach via IP, but this is routing differently, there's a good chance that these links wouldn't work. So again, just common practice sometimes you might have to load the host name. And also some enumeration tools work better with host names than just IP addresses for this exact reason here. So that's one way to test if you in fact did load your host correctly. So now that I know that I'm working with this host name, I can come back and then I don't have to worry about copying and pasting and then backspacing and then adding the IP or the host and then trying to do the thing. So that's hopefully a feature that you guys will use and appreciate. Less editing stuff that you're copying. So for now, I just want to try just a normal directory. And what this is going to do is kind of like Derb. It's going to use a dictionary list to try and guess what paths or what URLs exist on the application. And so if this is right, it'll run, and you can see it went through real quick and didn't really find anything. So we're looking for like 200s. 200 status is usually good. 300 some sort of redirect. 404 something is usually like a permission thing. 500 is like errors. So we did get 200, but it's for the index.html, which we're already looking at when we visit the actual page. We're already kind of looking at the index.html. So this didn't really yield any fruit I was hoping for, even after putting in the host name. Didn't give me anything that I can really work with. So my next thought is, okay, well, let's try and figure out, are there any subdomains like something .driftingblues.box. So for gobuster, there's a couple different modes. And then one of the modes we're going to look at right now is this is vhost mode. So again, we're just going to copy this because we already put in our target that propagates through the entire CTF toolkit. So any place, well, there are a few little exceptions, but 90% or more of CTF toolkit that would have a place for you where you would have your script have a target. This should inject it into that. So for now, we're just going to click copy. And what this is going to do is run gobuster in vhost mode against this target with this word list. Again, a lot of these enumeration tools work off of word lists. And essentially it's just saying, hey, try, for this mode up here, the file mode, try driftingblues.box/admin, try /login, try like 1,000 different, slashes and see what you get. That's essentially what these are. A lot of these web enumeration tools are doing when it comes to enumerating paths. So with that said, we're going to give ourselves some room, and we're going to come over here and we're going to paste the clipboard and run this. And so now what this is going to do is it's going to try and look for subdomains. So you can see here, it basically took this, our root, driftingblues.box, and for subdomains, it's going to try to append things to the beginning of it. Like, is there a dev.drift? Maybe there's a dev version. For those that are in AppSec, there's multiple environments that things are created in. There's usually the dev environment, and then maybe a staging or a sandbox or a UAT, or before we get to prod. This would be prod, and everything else before that or left of that is not prod. So you can see that it tried these things, and then you can see the statuses that the tool gave us back. Again, we want 200s. 200s are usually good. And we can see down here, we got a 200. So that's a good hit. And we got a 200 for this subdomain, test.driftingblues.box. So there's a good chance that if we mosey on over to this, it might load something. So that's what we would do. We would hop over to here. We don't need that anymore. We'll do test.driftingblues.box. Sure enough, we don't get like a 400 based error or permissions. We just get this, lovely message, work in progress /Eric. So again, now we have this Eric fellow leaving us multiple messages. He's over here on the home page. He was giving us hints about where were we at? Where was that? Oh, okay, sorry, yeah, right here. Also, Eric appears to be leaving us messages. So Eric is definitely like a player, maybe in more ways than none, or some user in the the extent of the application. So we're definitely keeping an eye on Eric because he seems to be embedded in a few different places on the application. So what have we learned so far? All right, so we found the IP through an nmap scan. We ran the nmap, we figured that there were a couple ports open. And since then, we've been focusing strictly on port 80, which is where all the web stuff kind of lives. So from there, we found out that there was a hidden message. We looked there, we found this obfuscated message, told us to basically use the host file. We added the host file to our gobuster directory enumeration script, and that did give us a hit for this test. So now what we want to do is, now that we know this is a legitimate endpoint or URL, now we kind of almost want to rinse and repeat and start all over and start enumerating this, so you can see how quickly we can land in a rabbit hole with things, because we haven't really even fully kind of exacerbated just the main route, just the DriftingBlues box. Now we're onto a subpath of that, or subdomain of that. So things can spiral out of control very quickly if you're not leaving notes or breadcrumbs for yourself to figure out what you've done, where have you been, what things have you not done yet. So I can't stress enough how important it is to take notes and to do your best when you take notes to try and make them some way, shape, or form structured, or at least repeatable, so that you don't, come back a few days later or a week later and look at it and go like, what the hell was I talking about? I have no idea what I was doing or where I left off. But none the case. So we found out that this is it looks to be a legitimate URL. At least we saw a note from Eric on there that it's a work in progress. So maybe it's not done, maybe it is, but nonetheless, we kind of, again, want to start all over and start enumerating stuff. So now we're going to run nikto against our subdomain here. So now we're going to come back over to here and essentially run this command, because now we want to run it again. We want to run it against this test subdomain. And again, nikto is just think of it as like I'm paraphrasing greatly here. Just think of it as like a vuln scanner for a web application. It tries to just assess it from the outside and find potential vulnerabilities or potential possible exploits, or maybe just things to say, hey, this looks interesting, maybe look this out. It kind of points things out to you. So we're going to run it again, because remember the first time we ran it, we didn't get anything. When I ran it the first time against the IP, I got back nothing that was useful. None of the stuff that was mattered. We're going to run it again, and we see that we actually get some entries. You see that we get some better information back. I can see that there's a robots.txt, which we didn't have before. And inside of that, we have this, what appears to be a path, which clearly looks suspicious. So now we're getting somewhere. We're making some more progress. So now what I want to do is I want to go look at robots. For those of you who are not familiar, robots is typically a file for bots, for web crawlers, to kind of say what's in and out of play. Like, hey, what can you crawl and what can't you crawl? So anything with a disallow typically means do not crawl this, and please do not log this so it doesn't show up in searches. Anything with an allow essentially says, hey, this is fair game. Please, you can log, you can crawl, you can log. This may end up in a if I do a Google search, maybe this shows up. If I Google search, driftingblues.box, this was like a legitimate site. This might show up as like an endpoint for it. But anything for disallow, it's supposed to honor this disallow, and it should not be publicly showing you in search results that this path exists. But for us attackers, this is very inviting to us. Anytime it says don't look or don't go or don't do, our nature is to look, do, and go. So no exception here. So we're just going to copy this, and we're going to mosey on over. We're going to replace our robots, because this is in the same path. We're going to replace our robots and put this in. And oddly enough, there's another note for us, although this time it's a different user. So as you come across any names, users, these are all things you should be filing away somewhere. Again, for me, I put them in my cherry tree, but again, wherever you put them, you should be keeping track of this stuff. But here's some very, very important information to us. So apparently through DB, whoever that is, DriftingBlues database, whatever, I don't know. I don't really care for now, but someone with this signature said, hey, is leaving us a note. We can use SSH password in case of an emergency, and it's this. All right, so we have a password, so that's great. Well, at least we think we have a password. Shirl, that's a familiar name. We saw Shirl before, so this is reinforcing that. So far, we have 3 users right now. We have Shirl, we have Eric, and this DB fellow. Told me that she added a number to the end of the password. So here's where things get a little interesting and tricky, because we have what now appears to be a partial password. We know that this is the meat of it, but it also appears that Shirl adds a number to it. So maybe this password is for Shirl. Maybe it's, we have no idea who the password is for. Maybe it's for this person. Maybe it's for Eric. We don't know, but all we know is that we're given this sort of root password, or not, I don't want to use the word root, but this the majority of a password, and then we got to figure out there's a number after it. So the manual thing that you could start trying to do is we could start trying to manually SSH into the box and just start adding, okay, let's try this. It's what does this kind of look like leet speak for, like I'm wacky yucky, if you kind of use some of the numbers for letters, which is like leet speak. So this 1 is an I am, this 4 is an A, so it looks like I'm wacky yucky. So anyway, so if we use this I'm wacky yucky password, we can try and SSH in and just say, okay, let's try DB or Eric or Shirl, and say SSH, at Shirl, and then with the test.driftingblues.box, and then it's gonna ask for the password, and I type in this thing 1, and maybe it fails, and then I do it again and type in a 2, and then I do it again, and I could sit there for the next year manually trying to figure out what this number could be just by simple trial and error. We have no idea what this number is. We have no idea how long the number is. At this point, we can just pray to the hacking gods that it's a small number, and that they're being generous with us. So obviously, we want to work smarter, not harder. So there's got to be a way we can just make a list, right? I mean, sure, I could type it out. I could type this out and add a 1, and then copy paste, and then 2, and then do that and manually add this stuff. But we got to work smarter and more efficient than that. So there's definitely a way we can script something to generate a password list for us, because we know this is the majority of the password, and we know we just got to stick a number onto it. And then the goal, right, immediately, the thought is, okay, we're going to make a password list. We already have 3 users so far. Now we can just leverage some tool to brute force these passwords with these users. So we have a tool that can do it, but we need to make the list first. So step 1 is going to be making a password list. And this is where Python comes in. So huge fan of Python. If you don't know it, I recommend at least getting a general grasp of it. I mean, most things you could probably Frankenstein or hodgepodge together to do some things that you want it to do. I'll kind of explain this a little bit, but to just kind of mosey along, you can see here that I've already have my password script and text. What I'll do is just rm that for now, so we don't have the password text anymore, and we'll generate that. And again, if we just cat the password.py, you'll see that it's the exact same thing that I have in the other thing. So essentially, we're just going to do a for loop. Before we do that, we're going to create a file called password.txt. That's file. And then we're going to run a for loop in this range of 0 to 101. I just randomly picked 100. I just totally randomly picked a set of numbers, because this could have been, I could have picked 1,000. I could have picked 1,000,000. I have no idea. It could have been a 4-digit number, a 2-digit one. I literally have no idea. My thought was, let me just try 100, like literally 0 through 100. If it's any of those numbers, maybe I get lucky. If it's not, then I'll increase this, maybe then to like exponentially 1,000, whatever. And then essentially what this is going to do when I run it, it's going to print on the screen our password, which we know we were given, plus our string, which is right here, this I. And then it's also going to write out to the file the same list. So it's going to iterate through this until it gets to 101 and then break and then stop. So essentially, it's going to print to the screen and it's also going to write to a file. So if we've done our Python correctly, I should technically see a count from 0 to 100. Again, in programming, we know 1 is always 0. So that's why you can see here that I have 101. If I went to 100, it would actually go from 0 to 99. Anyway, so you're going to print to the screen the password plus the number that we're generating, and then it's going to print to the file the exact same thing. It's going to print to a password.txt, this thing, and I'm concatenating or adding whatever you want to do, the I, which is the range, which is the number. So if I run, and we'll get to that later. Oops. If I run this, I should get a visual indication on the screen that it's generated, and we'll see that file. I deleted the file, so it should add it back. And then sure enough, boom, right? We wrote a quick script to do a whole lot of lifting for us when it comes to generating a possible password. So you can see here it ran, started off with 0, which is what we told it to do. It ended at 101, which in programming land, it's because it starts at 0, it's actually ending at 100. So my password file should also have this exact same information. And it looks like you didn't do anything, but it did. I actually catted out the file, and so you see the exact same thing. So now that I know that I have a what I'm considering a password file of this password we were given, plus a number that Cheryl says she adds. Again, we have no idea that this is even going to work. Her number, it could have been it could have been her birth date. We have no idea, but we got to start somewhere. So I'm just thinking, let's just start simple and pray that it's a low number, and we're not sitting around for eons, not only one, generating the list, but then two, iterating through it, because we still have to find a tool that can try all these logins. So if you're not careful, you could go down the wrong rabbit hole and be sitting somewhere for days. So we know we now have a password list, this password.txt. Now I did make my own list of users, right? We have a list of users that we could have found just through our journeys of going through the application, right? We found DB was the last one, and he was on the password page. So I thought, my thought was maybe, hey, this guy, maybe this is his password, because he's kind of writing, this leads me to believe this is his sort of signature. He's writing this message. Maybe this password is for him. Maybe it's for everyone. So I don't know, but nonetheless, I'm counting this as a potential username. Obviously we have Eric, and we also have Cheryl, just from our other enumeration and just sort of seeing things throughout the application. Plus Eric has left us numerous notes so far. I think as of now, this is the only mention of Cheryl, but nonetheless, it's still a username. It's still something that we should pay attention to, because you literally never know. That's what, again, is fun and can be infuriating, because everything is a potential. It's like a hacker version of escape room. You don't know what is part of the escape challenge and what is just part of the surroundings. Which is why enumeration is so important. I can't stress enough how important the enumeration phase is, because this is where you're gathering all the data and all the information you have on something, because everything you do is based off of that. This is what gives you all your different paths and all the different doors to go down, is the enumeration phase. So there are lots of applications out there that you can use for kind of brute forcing. I'm going to leverage Metasploit, the framework, which again, free, comes with Kali or probably all the different hacking OSs. So I already have it fired up over here. When you run it, there's numerous ways to start it. I won't get into all that, but once it's up and running, you should be presented with something like this. The banner is going to change on every load, but you should still be prompted with this sort of thing. So I know this module very well that I'm going to use, but for now, you can just run a search on like SSH login. And it's going to give us back some results. Again, I know the specific one that I'm looking for, and it's going to be this right here, number 4. It's auxiliary, which means it's not really an exploit. It's just like think of auxiliary modules are like testing things to see, does it meet a criteria? Does it appear to be vulnerable for something, as opposed to an actual exploit? And this, we're not trying to exploit anything. We're just trying to see if we can get a valid username password combination. So we're going to use 4. So we can just simply just say use 4, and that'll load that module. And now what we can do is show options. And what this will do is this is essentially going to tell us all the options that this module has. What's required and what is not, and if it is or isn't required. So anything with a yes means that it's required. It may already be set for us, but it means that it's required and we have to provide it in order for the module to run. If we don't supply that, it won't do the thing. So we have some yeses, so we're gonna tackle those. The first thing we have to tell this module is who's the target. And in Metasploit land, that's always going to be our host. So we have to set our host. And for us, let me see if I use the IP or the, okay, I use the actual subdomain. So I'm going to use the subdomain just for repeatability. So again, we're telling Metasploit this is the target address. Test dot. Make sure you get this right, because if it's wrong, you could sit around for nothing for no reason. So I believe that's right. DriftingBlues.box. Yeah. So we set that. Now, if I back to show options, we'll see that our host is set. Now we can see here our target is here. The next thing we want to do is maybe give it a user list, which is that list that we created, or I think it's user file here. So we can see here file containing user names, 1 per line. It's the output looks a little funky because the way I have this split over here, but we can see here that user file appears to be the set that we'll use if we're going to provide a file and make life easier. I'm going to pull this up. So we can do set, and we'll do user file, and then you can type the path. A lot of times you can drag and drop. For those that you don't know, just click after. Otherwise, when you hit enter to enter it, it'll actually open the file as opposed to telling Metasploit set that. The next thing we're going to set is the password file. We need to give it that, which is a file containing passwords, 1 per line. So we need to set this, set pass type file. And then again, same thing. This is that password list we generated using our smarts, our Python. So we're going to set that. To make life easy, there are 2 other things that I typically set when I'm using Metasploit specifically for brute forcing login. I will set a verbose to true. That will actually give you an output, a visual output of what it's running through. And then I will set stop on success to true. What this does is that instead of just seeing the password fly by, or like that it found something and maybe you miss it and then you've waited through an entire list for no reason, it'll actually stop. Once it finds it, it just stops. So we pretty much have everything we need to tell the tool. We've let's see here. We've met everything that this module requires us to meet for it to run. And so now what we're going to do is, and I timed this and it's about 3 minutes, we're going to run the exploit. And so what this should do, if it's successful, it should take the 3 users and the password list and then go through each user through the password list. So it should take the first user I had, which was DB, and it should go through that password combination from 0 to 100. If none of those work, then it should move on to the next username, which is Eric, and then do the exact same thing. It should go through that password we were given, and then the number we went, the range 0 to 100. And if nothing works there, then it will go to Cheryl. So that's essentially how this will work. It will go through each user at a time. It doesn't like thread them or anything. So we're going to run this. Last time I timed it, this ran for 3 minutes before we got a hit. And we can see here what it's doing. It's essentially trying to SSH into this IP address with this user, with this password. As just you would do as a normal manual check, I would SSH into this IP with this user at that IP address with this password. But again, we want to work smarter, not harder. But plus doing it manual would take way longer than having some tool do that for us. with that said, since we're going to sit here for a few minutes, I'm going to let this run. Do we have any questions so far? Feel free to unmute your mic and ask, or post in the chat, because again, it's going to feel like an eternity even though it's only 3 minutes. But again, now's a good time to, if you're hacking along and where you're at, any hurdles, or if you need further explanation as to why I've done the things that I've done. Again, I'm leaving out all the things that I've tried. But yes, please feel free to chat whatever questions you may have, or just unmute your mic. So we're
I have a question.
Yeah.
So are there categories of challenges? And by that, I mean, it seems as though this challenge has a lot of hints along there, like breadcrumbs or, whatever you want to call them. Then maybe some other challenges are world, as in, here's a box with vulnerabilities and nothing very interesting on there. I don't know if I made myself clear.
As far as the differentiation between the two, or
yeah.
So I mean, in the other boxes, because there's plenty of them on there, and there's a lot of boxes we've done in the past, and maybe in this series, this DriftingBlues series, maybe there'll be some like that. But there's some similarities and there's some differences. So the similarities is, and the tools that we would use are pretty much going to be the same. The difference is that they'll probably be a little bit more challenging, because they will be more around real world vulnerabilities that maybe you don't know what those are. Now, the good thing is that the tool or the tools you may use will usually point those out. Nikto is a very good example. When Nikto finds some things, it is pretty good about blaring that out when on the discovery side. So like on Nikto, it's usually good about pointing things out and saying, hey, this should be this, or this may be susceptible to this, which is why I leverage Nikto so much. So some of the things may be very obvious and some may not. It just all comes down to experience. And again, it just comes down to one of those things where you won't know or get until you just do tons and tons and hundreds of these boxes. But the good news is, again, is that the tools are all the same. It's just how you interpret what the tool is giving back to you. But a lot of these tools are usually pretty good about pointing things out. Usually if it's listed something, it's there's something, it's listing something, for a reason. And again, when we're getting to the web stuff, it's good if you have, knowledge about how, at least some fundamentals about web applications, how they work, where things may or may not be, but especially when it comes to doing enumeration with any type of directory brute forcing, or when we're talking about getting responses back, like you should know what response codes are, what they mean, because that will tell you where to look and then where to further, dig. So, there's only so much a tool can do. You're going to need to have some understanding of, one, how the tool works, but two, how does the thing work that you're trying to use the tool on. But again, at the end of the day, it's sort of the same tools. You're just going to get back. The hints are really cool because they kind of string you along. There's a good box, I forget the name of it, that I recommend 100% if you go to the SB Wasp YouTube. It was recorded. I did a walkthrough on it. I think it was the first one of the earlier boxes, and it's perfect for beginners because it literally holds your hand the entire way. Every hint that it gives you is like, okay, it explains everything of why we did it and what we're seeing. And then it basically says, okay, now that we have this, we're going to use this. Nope, wasn't Pumpkin Garden. That was definitely way earlier. But it's on the YouTube channel. I'm not sure. I can't remember if Pumpkin Garden was on the YouTube channel, but it's definitely on there. One of the earlier ones. But anyway, it's a really good place to start. That's definitely more hints, which are not really real world, but the concepts are there in the real world. You still have to enumerate. You still have to, use certain tools. You still have to gather information. The real difference is, are we using exploits to get from point A to point B, or are we just sort of solving puzzles to get from point A to point B? This has a little bit of both, but mostly around the former of just basically like some hints. But there's a couple boxes I've done in the past that are definitely more around exploits, whether it be like Heartbleed or like known exploits where we're all leveraging maybe metasploit more. to do some of the heavy lifting for us. But and I know this is very long-winded. I'm trying to buy time to answer the question, but yeah. So there is a difference, but I think at its core and the overlap, there's a lot of similarities to how to work on those boxes. So as I promised, a few minutes will have passed. We can see here that we did get through DB without any results. And then we moved on to Eric because he was the next user up in our list. And it turns out that Eric, it looks like his password is this I'm wacky yucky 6. So we got really lucky and taken a guess that it may exist within the first 100 numbers. So we got a hit. So again, what does this mean? This means that Metasploit, specifically this SSH login module, tried all these combinations. And when it got to Eric and this password, it logged in successfully. So we know without a doubt we have a password for Eric and we can log in with Eric. I'll show you something quick we can do with why I like this module, because when this module not only hits for the login, it actually logs in. It opens up a session and logs in, and there's some things we can do. So technically I can type sessions and it will tell us like, hey, we actually have an open session up with that. And then I can just say something like session 1 and or is it just is it use? Well, I forget what it is. Oops. Or is it sessions 1? There we go. So I can type in sessions 1 and now I'm in the session that this created, which means I'm logged in because the tool verified that it logged in, and it actually has logged in and created a session. It's basically just sitting there in the background going, hey, I'm logged in. What do you want to do? So I can type ls. I'm literally logged onto that box. Although we don't really have like our traditional bash shell that we would like, we don't really see like who we are and the path and all that yummy stuff. Now I can type in shell to try and get that, and it might sit for a minute, and there we go. Now this looks a little bit more comfortable, right? We've seen this type of bash shell before. This looks more usual, what we're used to seeing. I'm actually going to exit out. I'm going to stop using Metasploit from here on out and just SSH in, and that'll make sense later on. But naturally, I'm essentially logged in as Eric. I can ls, I can see things, I can do things as that user. The difference is that the shell I'm using is sort of removed from how I would like to see things from a more visual standpoint with color and things like that. But nonetheless, we could continue moving on from here, but to make our life easier, we're actually just going to SSH into the box. So I'm going to just exit out of this. And actually, I'll just close this and open up a new window. So we're kind of done with Metasploit for now. But I'll come back over here and open up a new one. And actually, to make things even easier, I'll come over here and open up another terminal here. And this will make sense too as to why I'm opening the terminals out of this. So what I want to do now is SSH into that box, and I want to get his password queued up, right? So we know we ran Metasploit login, and we set all the options we needed to. We ran it against our 3 users. We ran it against that password list we generated. A few minutes, we get this hit for Eric. So I'm going to copy this password. And now what I want to do is I actually want to SSH in as Eric, because we have his username and password now. So we can literally just SSH into that box. And we know 22 is open. Well, 1, because our SSH module from Metasploit logged in, but 2, we found that port open earlier during our enumeration phase in nmap. We saw that 22 is open. So we know that we can probably SSH into the box, and that's usually 9 times out of 10. The goal is to get into it somehow. Maybe that's it. We find credentials. Maybe we don't even use that at all. Maybe we're able to exploit the application through another means. But nonetheless, it's there. We can use it. So I'm going to enter. It's going to ask for the password, and then whoops, did I not pass the right one? There we go. So now we are Eric, and now things will look a little bit different. Now things look more like my terminal with color schemes and things like that. And I'm actually going to see if I can remove. Okay, we'll come back to what these are. These are just from when I hacked it earlier. Plus I have autocomplete. This is a lot of things that we get when we just do a traditional SSH into it. I think we're good for now. Yeah. So right off the bat, we made a lot of progress in a short period of time. We didn't even know what our target was. We found that through an nmap scan. We found some ports open. We found some websites. One of the questions was how did you change the name to Drifting Blues box and why? So again, we had a hint. There was a hint that basically said, hey, I know you should know how to use a host file to reach our secret location. So what that tells me is that I need to put the host in the host file so that we can enumerate it again to try and find basically find more secrets, more breadcrumbs and paths. So again, we just went to Etsy hosts and edited that and just added in the entry of the IP address and the host name. And then since doing that, that's how we found this test subdomain. When we ran the gobuster with against our subdomains, it found this, which we did not find that before. So that's what then allowed us to get this enumeration. And then when we ran nikto against that, then it allowed us to find this robots.txt file. And then inside of that was this hint here, this path. And then from within that, we got this password. So you can see all this long trail, the rabbit hole. We've been going down deeper and deeper and deeper every step. So we found this password, although we were told that there's a number, appended to the end of it. So that's when we had to try and, okay, let's make a list. We used Python to make life much easier for us. Then we leveraged metasploit login, or the login at the SSH login module, to just test the actual list that we had made. And then from there, we essentially found a hit. So now we just logged in as Eric because we have the password now. And right off the bat, this user.txt that we see here is, probably something we should look at. So we'll just cat that real quick. And then sure enough, there's our first flag. One, we know this because this is kind of a troll picture, and two, it actually says right there, flag 1 of 2. So we at least now know, like, there's 2 flags. We found one is user, very common, and then usually the last one is root. So just having done these boxes so often, sometimes the description may tell you on the actual vuln box, might tell you how many flags there are and what the goal is. Some do not. Some may just tell you like difficulty, insanity or beginner, and not even just take that itself for a grain of salt, because difficulty is very in the eye of the beholder. So anyway, so cool. First flag, 1 down, 1 to go. Awesome. Here's where things start to get challenging, because the next step, remember I mentioned before with the CTF toolkit and this, what I call the hacker circle of life. We have enumeration, we have exploitation, we have persistence. So we didn't really exploit anything. We were kind of given hints in the enumeration phase to give us that username and password. So now we're on the box. Well, now we got to do this whole cycle all over again. Now we're on the box. Well, we need to enumerate the box from inside. We may need to do an exploit from inside and maybe give us persistence from inside. So that's why I call it a life cycle. It repeats in different phases itself. These are the phases, but within each of these phases, you could be potentially doing this sort of the cycle. So we're on the box now. Now we need to start all over and enumerate. So we know that with enumeration, we have, assets both on the Linux front and the Windows front. So I think for this, we'll hop over to here, and we're going to do, let's see, where did I put this? Yeah, assets. And I think we're gonna do, no, I even get lost on my own site. Exploitation tools. No, I think maybe persistence. Yeah, sorry. Window or a Linux Prevesc. So our goal is privilege escalation right now. We know we're basic user, we're user Eric, and we got 1 flag, and we know that we need to most likely get root. And how do we know that? Well, it just comes with experience. I don't believe the description on the box actually said you're going to get 2 users, 1 as a user, 1 as a root. I think it may have said 2 users, but again, it's just common practice that when there's multiple flags or a flag or boot to root, It usually means at some point you're trying to get to root privileges. That may be the flag itself, or maybe there's a legitimate flag, which we just saw, or pseudo flag, which we just saw. So maybe we got to get root user and then find another one of these. For this privilege escalation, the goal is we are on the box, and now we need to try and figure out what can we do on the box to try and enumerate the box itself. Like, how are there tools that we can run against ourselves, because we're on the box now, that can tell us information about our box. So sure, we can dig around forever and try and go to different places and check privileges and all these things. But again, work smarter, not harder. There's some tools that we can leverage that other people have spent their smarts writing to try and do that for us. So two common ones are going to be less Linux exploit suggester, which when I run this, it's going to basically enumerate the box, my target boxes. I'm on that now, and say, hey, these are some exploits that might exist on this box because of the version of the kernel or whatever versions of this and that. The other one is a len-enum script, which essentially is doing something similar. It's going to try and enumerate it, but instead of actually giving us like possible exploits or vulnerabilities, it's just going to give us information about the box itself, maybe users, or maybe try and cat the password list, or it's going to give us more of that side of data. So that a lot of times I'll use these to try and build a full picture of what my target is. Because at the end of the day, I'm trying to get to root, and there's a good chance that I can't just sudo up to root, and I probably can't do my other go-tos like sudo -l to see the list. I have Eric's password, but it's probably gonna, see, I can't run sudo. So that also tells me something. So I can't even run sudo. I'm not in the sudoers group, or Eric isn't. So that already sort of like hinders some of the enumeration that I could do, some of the usual suspects of things that I would check. But again, there's tools out there. Now, the tricky part is that normally, and you can see here, I would do a wget to grab these tools from the internet, specifically GitHub, right? I would literally just copy this script and do it. The problem is that I'm running in host only, which means that this box does not have internet access. So I cannot run wgets from this in the network configuration that I have the box running in. If you are in bridged or NAT and it's pulling like a public IP, then you could. Then I could essentially reach out to the internet, and it would make things a little bit easier. The good news is that we have workarounds for how, because it's on the network, so I have network access, but I don't necessarily have internet access. So essentially what I want to do is set up a server on my Kali box and then host those files and then grab them from my target box. So I'm actually going to be making a connection from my target box to my Kali instance and grabbing those files that I'm going to use for internal enumeration, since I can't reach out to the actual internet to make for that enumeration. So we're going to leverage this again, our trusty Python, to make a generic web server, if you will. So again, the reason why I'm doing this is because the networking instance that I am running this virtual box in does not have internet access. It has network access, doesn't have internet access. So I got to get tools on here some way. I have to enumerate our target from the inside now that we're in. And to do that, it just makes more sense to try and leverage tools that already exist. So with that said, we're going to, again, from the directory that our tools are in. And so again, I'll do one example, and then we won't, and then you can kind of take that, but I'll rm less.sh, right? So now I don't have that anymore. But what I'm doing that I already did is, if I go to this here and go back to less, you can see here, this is the wget you would do, and this is the file. So if I literally just copy this, it's going to do a wget. If I come back to my instance, and again, we can see that there is no less here anymore. I deleted it. if I paste that, it's going to do a wget to that GitHub and for this file. If I run that, it's going to download it. It's okay. Now when I see less. Now somebody asks, oh, well, why isn't it, green or whatever? Well, because I didn't chmod it yet. And actually, it doesn't matter if you chmod it now because you're going to have to chmod it again when it goes over to the target. And essentially that just means change it to an executable. But I could basically this, oops, if I can spell correctly, plus X and then do less. So now when I do it now, basically allows me to do this type of thing and run it, which I'm not going to do because I'm on my target. I'm on my Kali. I'm going to do this from the target box, but that's just how I got them here. I just did the wget from CTF toolkit. But again, I can't do that from our target because our target doesn't have internet because of the way that I'm running this in my environment. So I need to essentially open up a web server because the two boxes can talk to each other. We know that. I can open up a web server using Python and then serve pages out of this directory that I'm in, and then grab these files and then run them here locally. So let me just go back to my Python. And then for persistence, this is how we can get persistence, is giving us a means to communicate with each other and move files. I'm just going to copy that. I'm going to fire this up, give us some room, and then paste this, run it. You're going to get an error at first because basically say, hey, you don't have permission. Well, because I'm not root. So I just need to sudo this and then run that again. And then type in my password. And now I'm literally from this directory where my files are at. And it's best to run it out of the directory your files are in that you want to pass over, just to make life easy when you're actually trying to get the path. Because remember, we're going to have to try and connect from the target to my Kali. So we're literally running a web server on just our port 80 just default. This is literally all you have to type to run this basic server. But now what this allows me to do is, again, we had files in there before. I deleted them so you can see me move them over again. But if I just do a wget now, to my Kali IP, which from the very beginning, it's that 56.1, because that's the internal subnet that these are on. So I need to type that in, and then the file that I want to get. So I want to get that less.sh. And you can see here, we got confirmation downloaded, and we can see our server logging that there was a get for this. So now if I ls, I see less. So cool. So this is one way, and you may have to do this in the future, whether it was intentional or not, to get files onto your target if the target doesn't have internet. It has network access, and we can leverage that. So this is one of those instances where I'm having to leverage the network to give me files because I can't get to the internet. Now I want to grab one more. I want to grab the the len enum. So I'm going to repeat this and then change this to len enum.sh. I think that's right. And save that. So we can see here, did it get? We got that. And if I ls now, we can see that we have len enum and we have less. So now I need to make these executable so I can run them. So that's where the chmod comes in, plus X, and then we'll try less first. And then now you can see it's colored. Now I can just do this. And it's going to run an internal script, and it's going to basically say, hey, after quickly enumerating this box and all the things we can find, here's some suggestions. Here's like kernel info and architecture, the OS, the version, like all that stuff. These are things that we could manually try and find. Again, and there are ways to do that. Obviously, this did it. But this does it a lot quicker and in kind of one file swoop and gives us more information. Unfortunately, there's nothing in here that I felt would get me to root. But essentially, it can give you a CVE. It can give you some information on what the vulnerability is, maybe point you to some information about what that is. But I know enough about some of these and what I'm probably trying to do to just kind of glance over this and go, there's nothing really glaring. And I could go down the rabbit hole of trying to literally exploit or see if it, could exploit all of these. But it was enough for me to go, this probably isn't, I'm probably not going to get anywhere in this. So I didn't bother. I moved on to the next script. And that's going to be the len enum. So we need to chmod it again, or chmod that one. Allows us to make it executable. And then now what this is going to do, this is going to do a way more thorough, again, 2 different tools, 2 different goals, 2 different outputs. This is going to try and give us more information about what's happening on the box and different paths of things and things. This is more informational. It might point out some things, but this is more of like information gathering, as opposed to the previous tool saying, hey, this could be susceptible to this. This is more like, hey, here's everything on this box that could be of interest. Specifically, normally a lot of this wouldn't be here because this is me doing things, but it does give us history, and there's some telltale information here about what this person did, the final things that person did before they like zipped this thing up and made it a thing for us. There's some things. So we're gonna check on some things here, but this is very telling information. And if those of you are asking, well, how do you know that? It's just experience. There's nothing in here saying, look at this, this is important. This is just things that you pick up on after a while in doing these. There's also appears to be some backups. Again, with experience, there's just certain places to check that are like the usual suspects, both in the real world, but also in these types of challenges. You'll start forming, again, habits, good and bad, of, again, what I just call the usual suspects. There's usual things you try, usual places you go, usually for these flags. They're in the user's root home, and then root's root, home, if you will. They're kind of respected directories. But I'll just kind of scroll up. There's just a ton of stuff that this is kind of pulling out. Things that were done, just files, things that can be run, nothing necessarily too specific. Maybe things that can be run by root and not. There's a plethora of information. You can spend quite a bit of time looking through this if you're not sure what it is you're even looking at. So again, technically this box is kind of easy, but again, easy is in the eye of the beholder of what that actually means. So if we go to our notes here, we got this one where we looked at some Privesc, some things I tried. I'll kind of go over this briefly because I think it's important, but I don't want to get into too many things that I tried that didn't work. But I could technically run this command, and essentially what it will do is it will give me a list of things that I can run with, like the SUID. And then a lot of times what we can do is reference this against the GTFO bins and essentially see if there are any known exploits for all of these things. And these things are actually pointed out in this script as well, if I scroll up far enough. And again, you're essentially looking at, hey, are there any known exploits to some of these processes that can be run? There weren't any. So I just wanted to touch over that. But less, didn't find much there, but Linynum did give me a few hints, a few places, to go. So the first thing I'll do is I'll mosey over to the var backups and ls that. And then right off the bat, again, because I'm sort of in my shell environment that's color coded like this, I can see what things have been made executable. And so since this was made executable, one of the things that kind of came to my mind was, why would you make this executable? And is there other things that would be maybe running on the box that could schedule things to do things? And with that, I'm specifically referring to a cron job. And a cron job is basically just think of a way to automate something at a schedule to run something. So, and I'm going out on a limb here. I'm just taking I don't know that this is the actual case here. I'm sort of taking this leap of, this is a rabbit hole I'm going to go down. Let's see what happens. And again, with good notes, at least you can go down it and back out of it, and then know that you can go down a different one that you've exhausted that list. So essentially one way to check, and it took me a while because again, I'm Eric. I am not in the sudoers group. I can't look at anything from any other user. I can't look at anything root is doing. All I can do are just see things that Eric is doing. So I think if you normally cron tab -L, that's how I would see if Eric has any cron jobs running. But I'm not aware of, since I'm not in sudoers, that I have no way of checking if a cron job is running for anyone else. And again, just think of it as a schedule that runs, that does something. It does whatever you tell it to do within, constraints. But for the most part, think of something that runs on some schedule. It could be every minute, hour, day, month, year, century, whatever that is. And again, I'm kind of going out on a limb with some of these assumptions. Sometimes they pay off, sometimes they get you in trouble. So, but what I could do is just ps-a just to see like what processes are running. And then, sure enough, I'm skimming through this and I'm seeing, okay, cron is in fact running. So there is a cron job. Now it doesn't appear to be for Eric, but it does appear there's a cron job running on this system. It's listed a few different times. So at least I know that a path, there's a potential path, that there's possibly a cron job running. And this sort of backup.sh, looks a little suspicious. Oops, type. And nonetheless, my confirmation is confirmed, or my suspicion is confirmed when I cat this. And again, I'm catting this only because of the way that it's highlighted, because of my particular bash shell with its color coding. That's to go back. That's why I actually opted out of the metasploit shell, because nothing is color coded. So just color coding makes things easier. So again, in my instance, when things are chmodded to be executable, they show up in that green color. So anything that's in that color that's specific to my environment, I know that it's executable. So then I look at this and go, well, why is that executable? And then what's in it? And then if you look, what it's essentially doing is it looks like it's a backup of the website that runs. So every X amount of time, whatever this cron job runs, it unzips or zips up the website. But this is what really caught my eye here, is this note inside of that. Having a backdoor would be nice. And then sudo, which I can't really do, temp emergency. So, okay, so this tells me like, oh, well, the first thing that comes to mind is let's go over to temp and see what emergency. Like we want to do that, right? Interesting. There's nothing there. However, there is the backup file that this kind of is mentioning, but I don't see an emergency. So I'm like, okay, well, that's, what do I do from there? So after, again, some guessing and some leaps and trying to put some puzzle pieces together, I'm thinking, well, maybe I need to create this, and the cron job is going to run against this, because I can't see them. This is all guessing at this point. But this is kind of what I'm thinking. It actually took me a few hours to get here once I got here, or I should say a few hours to get past this hurdle once I got here, to figure out what to do with this information that I'm being presented with, because clearly there's a hint here somewhere in what it's trying. So I'm trying to decipher this in my head. So how I interpreted this and what I ran with and got lucky was that while I can't see emergency, or maybe I have to create emergency, the cron job is going to run that. And since cron is running, and this is my logic, I could be totally way off, and maybe this isn't even the way that the box is supposed to be solved, which you may get into from what the author actually intended. My thought is that, well, if cron's going to run as root, because I do know that cron's running, and I know that this is running against this to automate something. And my thought is that if I create this file in this directory, when cron runs as root, it will run whatever I put in this file, in this directory, but in this file. Now, again, this is a total like shot in the dark, but I spent a lot of time on this, and that's kind of what I was running out of Hail Marys. So this was, I got literally like down to the wire. I basically, well, I'll show you guys. So, okay, so I'm in the temp directory, right? LS, there is no emergency, right? So I can just, create emergency, just touch and then emergency. Now we have emergency there, right? As it is, it doesn't do anything. I don't even know how often the cron job runs, but I know that when it does, it's going to probably run as root, and it's going to do something with that thing. So now my next thought is, okay, well, let's put in a reverse shell into this emergency file so that when cron runs, it triggers that reverse shell, and then I can get root, because I believe I'm believing that cron's going to run as root, and it's going to run that file as root. And so I would come in as root. That's my thought. Again, until this is just a proof of concept, right now that I'm trying to do. So with that said, we want to just basically do a very simple bash reverse shell. So I already touched the file, right? So it's there. So now I can just nano that, and then just copy and paste this. And there's a million one-liners out there. That's what we will call these one-liners, these reverse shell one-liners. And I just paste this. And essentially what it's doing is it's going to run as a bash script, and it's basically saying, the short of it is connect to this IP address, which is mine, over this port. I'll kind of just leave it at that. You can go online, dissect it, see what this is doing, the output, input, output, and all the way, you can decipher this, boil it down to. But at a high level, it's just basically saying connect to this IP. So it's a reverse shell, which means that the target is connecting to me over this port. And so we'll just kind of leave it at that for now. We'll save it. Now, if I just cat it, just to verify, we can see that our script is in there. And again, this is my Kali IP. It's gonna phone home to this IP over this port. So now I got to do is I got to catch this thing, right? So I don't need my Python server anymore. So I want to do a netcat, and I want to do the LVNP, and then 1337. Now this port, that's what the port is in this single liner, is what it's going to connect back to my machine on. Obviously, this is going to be whatever your IP address is for your Kali box or your parent, or whatever your hacking OS is. This can be anything you want it to be. It just so happens I like the old school LEET, 1337. It just means that whatever this port is, I have to listen on that port. They have to match, because it's going to phone home to it, to this IP, which is my Kali, over this port. So this has to match. So now what I'm doing is I'm telling Kali, listen. I'm saying, hey, look, listen for any connection on this port, and that's what's happening. So if I'm right, when cron goes to run against emergency, it will trigger my reverse shell, and I'll catch it over here. Now, for the longest time, this wasn't working, and I tried all kinds of one-liners. I was trying like how to escalate my privileges. I was trying all this, and nothing was working. And then I literally was like, okay, I'm going to go to bed. And like I was like, 5 more minutes, and then I'm going to just come back to it later, because I'm starting to get frustrated, and a lot of times just coming back with a fresh mind really helps. But it was really bugging me. Like I was like, I feel that I'm so close. So I was like, all right, well, let me just hop back on. I actually stopped the live share. I was like, hey, sorry, we got pretty far. We got the one user. We'll come back tomorrow. Let me work on this some. And but it was bothering me, so I couldn't put it down. And literally, I was like, okay, I'm going to go till 11, and then I'll stop. And then 11 came along. I'm like, all right, I'll work on it for another hour at 12 o'clock. And then 12 o'clock comes along, and I'm like, I know I'm so close. I'll give myself another hour, and then I have to shut this off and get to bed. And so literally all of a sudden it just dawned on me, like, oh, well, I don't know if cron can just run against a file. I'm pretty sure the file would have to be executable. So then I think like, oh my God, it's like the simplest thing. Like, let me make this thing executable. And then cron actually stands a chance of running and it doing something, because as a file, it to the best of my knowledge, and I'm not a cron expert, maybe Char can chime in later. I don't think you can just look at a file and run something. It's not a executable type file. So then I was like, oh my God, it's just like glaring at me. Like, let me let me make this thing executable. So now it's executable, and now is where I'm just like, I could be completely wrong. I could be on the total wrong path here. And I don't even know, I know cron's running, but I don't even know the frequency. This could be days, it could be a week, maybe it runs once every century. I literally have no idea. And so I just left it running and I just waited. You know, I was running around the house doing some stuff. I'd come back in and look, and I shit you not, all of a sudden I got a hit. It was listening, and the cron ran at whatever the interval is, triggered my reverse shell, and now I am root on this box. So I was like, holy crap, that worked. So I'm root. And sure enough, the first thing you do is figure out, you know, where you are. And then I got really lucky here that, you know, at this point, it's pretty much going to be a done deal. If I just cat this root.txt, we're going to see our 2 of 2. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. That is the root flag of DriftingBlues 1. And yep, that's how I got that one. So I will end there, and then we can definitely open up the floor for thoughts, concerns, questions, all that jazz. If people are hacking along, if anyone is stuck, but feel free to unmute your mics. I tried to get this through fairly quickly. I know we're already approaching 2 hours now, but definitely, you know, please feel free to unmute your mics, ask some questions, and we can definitely have some discussions on this.